Thank you very much, Andrew Harwood, for bringing up the issue of "do as I say, not as I do." You point out that I got the phrase wrong. Maybe I did. I don't remember exactly. "Do as I say, not as I do" is what I think you meant, Tim. A phrase told to me from my parents as a child, which was explained to me in the lyrics of "Dyer's Eve" by Metallica growing up. Now you know the source of my corruption. Well, maybe. I don't think it's that corrupt, really. But the concept of doing as I say, not as I do. My immediate thought of this is that it goes back to the water babies, but in fact, I think that's not true. It's an idiom which conveys the idea of instruction and false instruction, or hypocritical instruction. And although Charles Kingsley uh, does have characters who are clearly hypocritical. Kingsley's book was published in 1863, I think. It's a children's story. It's a charming story, and if you haven't read it recently, please do. The phrase "do as I say, not as I do" isn't there. There is a phrase called "do as you would be done by," and I'll get to that in a few minutes. But the themes are there. This idea of hypocrisy and moral lessons, particularly in the character of Mr. Grimes, the abusive chimney sweep who exploits and mistreats little Tom. And Grimes's actions sharply contrast with the moral lessons that the book gives us about kindness and justice and the sort of journey, his pilgrim's progress. The disparity can be seen as a reflection of that principle of "do as I say, not as I do," or a reflection of the rejection of that principle, "do as I say, not as I do," where authority figures fail to live up to the moral standards that they're supposed to uphold. Kingsley uses the story as a critique of the social conditions and the treatment of children, much the same way as William Blake writes, I think, two poems about chimney sweeps, "Weep, Weep," and the adults in the story, in Kingsley's stories, exhibit behaviours that contradict the ideals of society that they supposedly support, and that again echoes this idea of saying one thing and doing another. And as Tom undergoes his transformation, this idea, this sort of Darwinian principle which underpins the book, from a human boy to a water baby, and he has his various adventures. He learns valuable lessons about virtue, about responsibility, and about empathy particularly. And the contrast between the guidance he receives and the behaviours that he observes in adults around him serves as the sort of narrative mechanism to emphasise the moral teachings in the book. But, really we learn more by looking at other people rather than by what we are told. And the phrase, the phrase and the reference that Andrew picks up is about the failure of the Conservative Party, and I can think of a number. I can give four, five, six, let's say six examples from the Conservative Party where. So Boris Johnson, the COVID-19 lockdown violations, when Boris Johnson faced this backlash for attending gatherings that violated the COVID-19 lockdown restrictions that he and his government had imposed, these stringent rules that he had imposed, and the Partygate scandal that effectively produced a sort of public outrage that led to his resignation. Matt Hancock. "Oh, Gina! Let's get into the stationery cupboard and make it move." Haven't done that for a while. The health secretary was caught breaching the social distance guidelines by having an affair. I wouldn't call it an affair. I'd call it a clinch. We were looking for an HB pencil with a rubber. And with a close aid. An aid! Give me an aid. And this was controversial because Hancock was a prominent. I'm prominent. I'm prominent, matron. Yes, and he was prominent in promoting and enforcing the COVID-19 restrictions. Dominic Cummings is another one. His lockdown violation, hello, although he was not a minister, Cummings was a senior advisor to Boris Johnson. I'm a senior advisor to Boris Johnson. And he travelled across the country during lockdown, allegedly to ensure the safety of his child, about childcare and about checking his eyesight. And this contradicted the government's travel restrictions and led to widespread criticism. Priti Patel, the bullying allegations. She was the Home Secretary. She faced allegations of bullying her staff. It was particularly contentious because the Conservative Party says it promotes a workplace of fairness and respect. Tell that to the NHS whistleblowers. An investigation found that she had breached the ministerial code, so she was a bully, but she wasn't removed from her position because Boris took pity on her. And then there's David Cameron, who faced scrutiny over his family's use of offshore tax havens revealed in the Panama Papers, and this was soon seen as hypocritical given his stance on cracking down on tax avoidance. George Osborne, the man who was putting out the austerity measures, he implemented severe austerity measures which led to cuts in public services and in welfare. But his critics argued that the impact on vulnerable populations contrasted sharply with the privilege that he and his friends enjoyed as the elite members of the political leadership. So these are just a few examples. Should I put allegedly somewhere? These are just a few examples. No, allegedly I'm prominent. Yes, these are a few examples that highlight this is a recurring theme, and it's something that has got more and more prominent in the as the Conservative Party has gone on. As for the phrase, I said I'd get back to it. As for the phrase "do as you would be done by." Do as you would be done by. This is an expression of the golden rule. It's a fundamental ethical principle which is found in many cultures, many religions, and it means treating others as you would like to be treated yourself. And in Charles Kingsley's book, The Water Babies, this is a character called Mrs. Do As You Would Be Done By. And she represents the embodiment of moral principle, teaching Tom and other characters in a classroom the importance of empathy and ethical behaviour. And she's a fairy-like figure who takes care of the water babies. She is kind and fair, guiding Tom to understand the value of treating others with respect and compassion. And through her actions and interactions with Tom, she contrasts to be done by as you did, another character who represents the consequences of one's actions, essentially reaping what one sows. And the character of Mrs. Do As You Would Be Done By, she helps Tom by encouraging him to consider other people's feelings and experiences, and it's critical for his moral growth, his transformation throughout the story. And maybe there should be a minister for Do As You Would Be Done By. But it picks up ideas which are central to the biblical narrative. Matthew 23:3, Romans 2:21-22, James 1:22. But particularly, I think, the parable of the Pharisee and the tax collector in Luke's Gospel, chapter 18, verses 9-14, where Jesus contrasts the self-righteousness of the Pharisee with the humility of the sinning tax collector. And the Pharisee boasts of his righteous deeds but lacks true repentance, while the tax collector says, forgive me, for I'm a sinner. And it serves as a caution against pride and hypocrisy in religion and indeed in the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew chapters 5-7. Christ talks about blessed are the meek, the encouraging his followers to go beyond the mere outward observance of religious laws and rituals to embody the spirit of truth, of love, of mercy and righteousness, rather than this display. Sorry, it's a really long answer, isn't it? I'm so sorry.